Welcome to the podcast of Life Change Church, where we exist to love people to life change. We hope that this podcast is both challenging and encouraging to you. Enjoy the message.
Good morning and happy New Year's Eve. Before we jump into it, just let you know there is no events going on tonight, so no student life, nothing along those lines. So just want to encourage you to spend time with your family, spend time with your friends. But I do want to let you know that coming next week, January 7th is our guest reception. So if maybe you're newer here, you're not necessarily plugged in, or you feel like you're not plugged in, this is really designed for you. So this will be after second service, right about 11:30, 11:45. A light lunch is provided, but it's a chance to really to meet some of our directors, to meet some of our leaders, and really a chance for you just to meet some other people as well, some newer people, and then you just to feel connected in. And then coming up January 14th, prayer is back. So in the evenings we do prayer. We do them on the second and fourth Sundays of each month. So if you've never been to prayer and you think like, dude, this sounds weird, like how am I going to do that? I can't pray for an hour. It goes faster than you think, and it's a time of just really a peaceful time where we put some slides up that can even direct you through prayer, and then we throw music in the background and just to give you a time to start off your week with God. So that's back January 14th, and then life groups will be starting new in February. So look for more information coming on those things as well. But we're excited as we really begin 2018 and end 2017 together. So it's just a fun day and just a fun time to be here. And today we are actually completing our Christmas series entitled B-Roll. And again, throughout this series, what we've done is we've looked at the many different roles in the Christmas story. And again, there's those roles that you hear each and every year. But then there's some people that are a little bit more behind the scenes. There's some people who may not always get the spotlight, but still played a part. And what we've been doing was been trying to pick out a few of those lesser talked about characters in the story. And this is why we've entitled it B-Roll. Again, it's a made-up word, which pretty much means anything other than the main character. But what we've seen through this series is that there's no small parts with God. There's no small parts in the story when it comes to God. And you might be thinking right now, like, why are we even talking about Christmas? Like, why are the Christmas lights still up? Why is all this going on? What are we still talking about? Christmas was over. It was last week. If you're somebody like me, like you get so excited that the radio stations actually start playing music again instead of Christmas music throughout. So, and that's just kind of what you're like, right? But today we're going to talk about some characters who often get overlooked and some characters who are actually late to the party. But before we jump in and talk about that, let me just ask a couple of you guys, how many of you have ever been late before, right? Should be everybody, right? We've all been late to something, to some party, to something, even like this Christmas season. Like I bet we'll just ask this question. How many of you guys were late to a Christmas party this season, whether it's your family, whether it's friends? Right? It's always fun to go in there because you see people that come late to a party and you know that they were actually fighting in their car on the way there. Right? They come in and then everybody's head turns to them and they're looking like, oh yeah. And then their face just shows exactly what they were talking about in the car. Like one of them caused them to be late, right? One of the couple caused the other to be late. And the truth is there's a couple different people, right? There's those who are notoriously late for everything. So just be honest. Raise your hand if you are notoriously late for everything. We've got a couple of those in there, right? Okay, now raise your hand if you're on the other end of the spectrum who you're early to everything, right? Okay. Yeah, this is the 9 o'clock service. The 10:30 service will be the people that are late for everything, right? So I think there's those two kinds of people, right? There's the one who's notoriously late, and then there's the one who's early to everything. They know that the early bird catches the worm, right? So for Sarah and I, she's not really a late person, but she's not really an early person. We'll just say that. She's more like, I'll show up on time. But in my mind, like if you're on time, you're late. And if you're early, you're on time, right? And so when we get a little bit late, when we get pushed a little bit behind, it kind of throws me into a panic. And if you don't know me, I have some OCD tendencies. So there's some times where I'll panic just a little bit. And when we're late, I sometimes get thrown into this panic. And this is one reason why, if you ever noticed, Sarah and I actually drive separate to church. It's not because we don't get along. It's because I want to get there early. I want to be here to get everything set up and prepped and ready to roll. But sometimes we have two kids, and I'm not going to throw it all on Sarah, but sometimes our two kids and Sarah, we all just kind of get pushed a little bit behind. And the fact is, this whole thought process, it sometimes drives Sarah nuts as well, right? It's a lot of pressure on her. And this whole idea of being late doesn't always work out as well either, though. Because sometimes it backfires on you if you're early to every single thing in life. So this past week, we had a Christmas parties, and we had a Christmas party on my family's side, which is out kind of in Lancaster, beyond Lancaster, kind of in the sticks, in a little town called Sugar Grove, if anybody's ever heard of it. So as normal, I wanted to show up early. So we get in the car, and we show up early. What we didn't know is it was held at a church, and this church was actually still having services at this time. So the party actually got pushed back. So we were at this party like over an hour early, and we're driving around like the sticks of Fairfield County. We're driving along like Hocking River and everything. Like, let me just tell you, like, this is kind of a weird place to be driving around. You don't know if like Sasquatch is going to come out, or even worse, like one of my family members. Like, you're thinking, so we're driving around, and it was like, it came back, and it kind of backfired on me to get there so early. But the truth is, our timing often can be off, right? We've all experienced when our timing is off. We've all experienced being a little bit off schedule. But what happens is we're just off our own schedule. We're never really off of God's schedule, because God's timing is always perfect, which is what I want you to walk away with today, and what I want you to understand. God's timing is always perfect. It's perfect no matter what, and it's perfect no matter when, even when it doesn't feel like it to us, right? There are times where we may feel like, man, God is showing up late in our lives. There's even times where we feel like we're showing up late for God in our lives, and we put a pressure, and we really get down on ourselves because we feel like we're showing up late to God. And it throws us into this panic. But we need to remember that God's timing is always different than ours. In fact, God's timing often doesn't make sense within our own plans. But within His plans, His timing is always perfect. And His timing is perfect because He is perfect. He's so perfect that He's actually timeless, and He's not even bound by time itself because He created time. Therefore, His timing is always perfect, and that's why it doesn't always make sense. And that's why sometimes it even feels late to us. But this is demonstrated through the story of the wise men or the Magi. So if you have your Bibles, we're going to go through, we're going to look at this in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. So if you have your Bibles, go there with me. Again, if you don't have a Bible, we always challenge you to download the YouVersion Bible app. It's just an incredible resource to take with you wherever you go. Reading plans are on there, so you can be reading your Bible every single day, and we still put some reading plans out on our social media each week. So we'd challenge you to follow us there and then jump in and read with us as well. But in this passage of Scripture, you're going to see the fact that the wise men showed up a little bit late to the party, but it was still exactly God's plan. It was actually His timing. And a little background on the wise men. See, many times we see the nativity scene, and we see the shepherds in there, and then we see 3 wise men. But the truth is, this isn't really a correct depiction of what's happening here. In fact, there's no scripture that even says that there's 3 wise men to be exact. There's multiple, but the exact number is actually not necessarily known. And if you look at the wise men, we're definitely not there at the birth of Jesus. They were sent there after the birth by King Herod. In fact, they most likely showed up months, if not even a year or so later, right? They showed up after Jesus was born. So check this out in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where's the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." So here's the wise men, right? The Magi. And they saw this star, and they saw the star after Jesus was born. And once the star came up, they left and they went to Jerusalem. So they didn't even go to where Jesus was, right? They didn't go to Bethlehem. They went to Jerusalem, which is about 5 miles up the road and this is where King Herod was. And to get just to Jerusalem, so the Magi actually came from the far east. They traveled about 1,000 miles just to get to Jerusalem. And just a little bit of background on the Magi, a little bit more. The Magi, they weren't really religious people. In fact, they were scientists. They were people who sought after logic. They were people who sought after facts. Right? They were scientists who studied the stars and tried to match everything up with what they're reading. Right? So they studied the stars. They studied these prophecies about the light. And then really when a king would be born. So when they saw this star, they knew it was special. They knew it was pointing to the king. They knew it was pointing to the king of the Jews, which is why they traveled to Jerusalem. And what they're doing is they're trying to tie all of this together. The fact that they found a star pointing to the birth of a king, it was a huge deal. And it was really connecting this religion and education all together. So they are ready to chase after it. So it continues on here in verse 3. It says, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. And Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I may go and worship him. So here's Herod. The wise men come in. He finds out about all their learnings. He finds out all that's what's going on. And then he sends the wise men to see Jesus after he was born. He says he's going to sending them so he can go see and worship them, but really his motives were a little bit different. Right? His motives were not to worship him, but his motives actually stemmed from jealousy. So this is why the wise men were really late to the party. And this was the motives of how they were sent. But if you look at it, God was still in the background. God's timing was still perfect. God's plan was still perfect, and he was still working. Verse 9, it continues on. It says, after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. The wise men experienced Jesus. Right? The wise men, through their studies, through their works, through their research, and all their prophecies, they experienced Jesus, and all these things were proven true because God showed it to them in his timing. God showed it to them when they relied on his timing, when they walked out his plan. And again, God's plan looked a little bit differently to them, right? God's plan definitely looked different from what King Herod had intended. And if we think about it, God's plan often looks different than what we intend for our own lives as well. In fact, God's plan looks different than for even what others portray for our own lives as well. But when we live it out, we can become like the wise men, and we can become overjoyed. The wise men were overjoyed, and they experienced the fact that God's timing was always perfect. I think the problem is, though, too many times in our lives, we don't follow his plan, but instead we rely on our own plan. We follow our own timing as well, right? We follow ours. See, too many times what happens is we just get a glimpse of God's plan, and because of that glimpse, because of just that little portion we see, we don't fully rely on his plan. And if we can't trust his plan, we can't trust his timing as well. And I think too many times this is really where we find ourselves. If we're honest with ourselves, we've probably missed out on some things that God had for us because we weren't willing to wait, because we weren't willing to trust in his timing. We miss out on these things where God could turn that bad thing that we've gone through. We missed out on God turning it to good because we weren't willing to wait. We missed out on that blessing that God wanted to give us because we weren't willing to trust his timing. We miss out on experiencing his perfect plan because we're chasing ours too much, right? Too many times I think we take things into our own hands, or even worse, too many times we just give up. I think there's moments in our lives where we could look back to and we could see where we made things worse because of this very process. Because of this very process of not trusting God, but trusting ourselves more. Instead of being a steward of our finances and trusting God and waiting for his timing, maybe you took things into your own hands, right? And because of that, maybe you made things worse and dug an even bigger hole of debt. Right? Instead of waiting for the right person in your life, maybe you forced it into your timing, and now you're kind of dealing with the frustrations of that. You're dealing with the struggles of that, right? There's different things that you have to face because you forced it instead of allowing God to work. Maybe instead of reconciling a broken relationship, maybe instead of that, what you've done is you've harbored onto anger, and you set out for your own vengeance, and it's been eating at you every single day. Maybe instead of allowing God to show up in your marriage, instead maybe you just gave up and now you have regrets that you're holding on to. Listen, anytime we chase after our own desires more than we chase after God's desire for us, we will end up falling short. We will end up in sin. And the truth is, there's always consequences to sin. There's always things that we have to deal with and go through when we fall into sin. But the good news is this, that it's not too late to experience His perfect timing. With God, it's better to be late to the party than to never show up at all. And in fact, sometimes being late is exactly what He wants. And you see this with the wise men, and we can see this with our lives as well. I mean, think about the wise men. Here are these guys that they relied on logic, right? Here's these guys who relied on logic. They relied really on themselves. They relied on their own understanding. And again, they were months, if not a year or two, late for the birth of Jesus. In fact, even when Herod sent them, their mission was basically to destroy Jesus. But when God showed up, everything changed. When they experienced God's plan, everything changed, and they experienced that His timing was perfect. And this timing led to their joy. Again, if you go back to verse 10, it says, when they saw the star, they were overjoyed, right? They were on cloud nine. They were ecstatic. They were overjoyed. Now again, here's a group of guys who were known for their logic and intellect. Here's a group of guys that were like scientists. Like, just be honest, these guys were kind of like a little bit on the nerdy side, if we're going to be honest with who they really were. And if we're thinking at it, if you look at people who are known for logic and intellect, these people never show emotion, right? People known for logic and intellect very rarely show a lot of emotion. But it says that these guys were overtaken by joy. They were overtaken by emotion, all because God's timing was perfect. And it's not too late to be overjoyed in your life as well. Maybe some things right now, maybe there's some things that you would hope for, and because of your past mistakes, because of some things that you've done, maybe you think it's too late to ever achieve them. Let me encourage you, it's not too late. Maybe you've given up on the idea of ever truly being happy and experiencing joy. Listen, it's not too late. It's not too late to be overjoyed. It's not too late to experience joys in the area of your life where maybe you relied on yourself more than you did God. It's not too late to experience joy in those areas of your life where maybe you feel like you messed up. Because our God is a God of redemption. And through Jesus and His timing, He can redeem any and every area of our life. Imagine being overjoyed. Imagine being overjoyed in your finances and in the mistakes that you've made in those, right? Imagine being overjoyed in your marriage and in areas that maybe you've given up on. Imagine being overjoyed in your relationships with others. Imagine being overjoyed in your family. Imagine being overjoyed in your career. It happens when we rely on God's timing, and it happens when we rely on His plans. And here's how we do this. To experience God's timing, to experience the fact that it's always perfect, and to be overjoyed in our life, first we always have to chase hope. We have to chase after hope, which for many of us, this means we need to change our mindset. Many of us, we think too many negative thoughts, and we just let negative thoughts stir out of us and every single time. But what we need to do is we need to think positively, and we need to chase after hope. If you look at the wise men, if you look at the Magi, what they did is they followed God, right? They followed His light. They chased after hope. They chased after these hope and these prophecies in which they didn't even believe in, right? They chased after this hope of what was foretold. And if they look at it, they did so at a pretty expensive cost. In fact, they did so even when it didn't make sense to them. And they did so really in something they were chasing after, this hope that they didn't even believe in, but yet they were willing to chase after it no matter the cost. They were willing to go 1,000 miles just to chase after this light, right? This cost was high for them. Again, go back to verse 9. It says, after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Here they are. They're following this star. They're following the star all the way from the far east. They've followed this star thousands of miles, but they continued on. Even when they saw King Herod, they continued to chase after this hope. Like, talk about a risk, right? Talk about a cost. And they did all of this to experience God. And because they chased after it, they experienced that His timing was perfect and that they were overjoyed. They were overjoyed by the hope of the world. They were overjoyed because they experienced who Jesus was. And we need to do the same thing. We need to chase hope no matter what the cost. And when we chase after hope, oftentimes it's not going to make sense. Oftentimes people are going to look at us and think that we're crazy. They're going to think that we're too optimistic, that all we can see is rose-colored stuff, right? We're looking through rose-colored glasses. But we need to chase hope even when it doesn't make sense, and especially when it doesn't match our timing. Think about it in your life right now. What's the hope in your life that seems so far away? Maybe for you, maybe it was a dream that God gave you as a child, but maybe you've given up on that dream, right? Maybe for you, it's a prayer that you used to pray, and then all of a sudden you kind of quit praying that prayer, right? Maybe for you, it's an encouraging word spoken to you by a person in your past. So my challenge for you is to chase after that. My challenge for you is to chase after that. Don't give up on that dream. Don't stop praying that prayer. Don't forget that word, but instead chase it at all cost. Chase hope no matter what. This week, my challenge for you is to take that goal, take that dream that you had when you were a kid, and turn it into a goal. Write it down. Put it on paper. This week, many of you are going to put New Year's resolutions. Listen, I want to challenge you to make your New Year's resolution big. Make it the dream that you once dreamed. Write it down. Put it on paper. And then put steps and process of how to live it out and invite God into each and every step. This week, journal that prayer that you used to say. Journal it. Write it down. And then begin to say it every single day. Begin to pray that prayer again. Share that word of encouragement that somebody shared with you and begin to live it out. But chase hope. The truth is, God sends everyone hope that leads to Jesus. So who or what has God sent you? And how are you going to respond? And another question is, who has God made you the hope for? The truth is, we need to be hope for others to see. We need to chase after hope ourselves, but we need to be the hope for others to see. If you call yourself a Christian, we need to let others see Jesus through each and every one of us. We need to encourage others. We need to love others, and we need to uplift others. We need to give hope to others to chase after so that we can chase after hope no matter what the cost. And then we need to worship. To experience God's timing and to be overwhelmed by joy, we need to continually be in worship. And part of really understanding and experiencing God always comes through worship. Now, worship is more than just a music, right? It's more than just a style, but worship is something, but music often can get us in the presence of God, and it can put God in its rightful place. And we often can understand and experience God because of that. This is why we start out our services with music. It's not because this is the worship part. No, the whole entire service is a worship part. In fact, our whole entire life is a form of worship. But it starts off and gets us ready. And if you look at the wise men, they understood this. They knew that to experience God, to be overwhelmed with joy, that it was a lifestyle, it was a form of worship. In verse 11, it says, on coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. They bowed down and worshiped him. And for them, worship became a lifestyle because worship is a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle of giving adoration for God. It's a lifestyle that expresses how good God truly is. It's a lifestyle that places God above everything. If you look at the wise men, what they do, they bowed down. What this was signifying is that they were humbling themselves and that before God, and they were lifting Jesus up. Think about your life right now. How can you express how good God is in your life? How can you show him adoration? How can you bow down and lift him up in your life this week and every day, even beyond, right? Maybe for some of you, maybe for you, this week what you need to do to worship God is to identify those good things and share it. Share it with a friend. Share it with a neighbor. Share it with a family member. Maybe for some of you, maybe it starts with music. Again, we set the tone with worship. Worship is a lifestyle. It's not music, but we set the tone with music. So maybe as we sing this last song here in a couple minutes, maybe for you, instead of just standing there staring off blankly, maybe for you it's to actually sing. Maybe it's for you to even get crazy and even lift your hands and it feels weird, but it's not about you, right? It's actually signifying that God is above you. Like you can hold the TV, you can do all that kind of stuff, right? But take that chance, right? Take that chance. Risk a little bit to show that you're worshiping God and you're placing him above everything. Whatever it is, begin to worship in your life and make it a lifestyle. So number 2 is worship, and then number 3, how we experience God's timing, is to give extravagantly. When we give extravagantly, we will experience His perfect timing, and we will be overjoyed. But to give extravagantly means that we give our very best. We give our very best. For the wise men, the Magi, they brought treasures to Him. It says, in verse 11, it says, they opened their treasures and presented Him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. If you dig into these gifts, these were pretty significant gifts. These were gifts given to a king. Now, gold was extremely valuable. It still is today, right? So it was something that was given to a king. And frankincense was an incense that was burned during a time of worship to create this good smell, to bring all the senses in during worship. And myrrh, it was a dried up tree sap that really was a sweet smelling perfume. All these gifts were extravagant gifts. They were gifts given to a king. They were gifts given describing who they're giving to. They're describing who Jesus was. Think about our lives. How can we give extravagantly to Him? What's something we can give that describes who Jesus is in our life? For you, maybe it's your finances, right? Maybe for us, maybe we trust money more than we trust God. An extravagant gift is to change that mindset and trust God more and to give regularly. Maybe for you, maybe it's your time or maybe it's your talents. Maybe for you, it's the fact that you need to show that He is the King by placing Him first in your time. By placing Him first, by serving, by attending more regularly to church, by attending and sharing more of yourself with others, right? Maybe for you, it's your actions. Maybe there's some things in your life that you need to change, and you know you need to change it. And that would be an extravagant gift to give Him, to change your lifestyle and to live according to His word instead of according to your own will. Maybe for you, maybe it's your prayers. Maybe your prayers in a time of prayer is what God wants from you and desires from you as an extravagant gift. Listen, our prayers, our action, our finances, our lives, they all serve as extravagant gifts. And my challenge for you today is to give extravagantly, which really means that we live for Him in everything we do. We live for Him, and living for Him involves the fact that we have to change up our plans sometimes. In fact, living for Him even means we change up the plans that others may have for our own lives as well. If you look at the wise men, they started out their journey and they went to the current king. And their plan was to serve the current king. Their plan was to serve King Herod. And obviously, if you look at King Herod, his plan was for the wise men to serve them as well. But when the wise men experienced Jesus, everything changed. And they began to live for Him. They began to live for God. And a true experience with Christ will always change the way we live. A true experience with Christ will always lead us to live for Him. And if you look at the wise men, verse 12, it says, after and having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. They returned to their country by another route. I think there's some times in our lives where God is trying to reroute us. He rerouted the wise men. I think He's trying to do the same for us. He's trying to reroute our path so that we can fully live for Him. Think about your life right now. Is there a path that you're going down that needs rerouted so that you can live for Him? So that you can experience that His timing is always perfect. When we chase after hope, when we worship Him, when we give extravagantly and we live for Him, we'll experience His perfect timing. And even better, we'll be overwhelmed by joy. What's the hope that you need to chase after? How can you worship Him every day in your life? What's something that you could give extravagantly for Him? And how can you fully live for Him?
Thank you for listening to the Life Change Church podcast. If you were here today and you were listening and you made a decision to follow Christ, we would love to hear about it. Or maybe you're here and you're listening and that God is asking you to make the next step with whatever that it is in your life. We would love to hear about it and partner up with you. If you would, go to www.mylifechangechurch.com and under the media section, please fill out the contact us information and let us know if you made a decision to follow Christ. Let us know what God is asking of you. And if you need prayer, we would love to partner up with you in prayer as well. We hope that you enjoyed the podcast and that it both encouraged and challenged you. Have a great week.